Highly requested, and today I will share 3 tips for playing out of position. We're going to be looking into pre-flop, what you can do better, as well as playing out of position as the pre-flop aggressor, and of course covering c-betting. And last but not least, I will dive into playing from the big blind, especially as a short stake, and what we can do better in order to improve our win rate. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. And of course, we want to be looking into spots that are not so easy to play, right? So spots where we have a gut shot, like here we defend the queen high, which is a very, very standard defend, or where against a hijack, we flop a middle pair. So I share my approach later on when it comes to playing out of position with a short stack and what exploits you can make against population. But first, we're going to be looking into a spot where we are under the gun and we're raising from under the gun. Can you imagine? So my first tip is actually that the deeper you are, the tighter you should be open raising. This is a big fallacy where a lot of players think, well, the deeper we are, the more hands we're supposed to play. But don't forget, poker is a zero-sum game, because also when we're in position and we're deeper, we tend to play more hands, suited connectors, very speculative hands. But when out of position is supposed to play more hands because he's deeper, which means most people's reasoning is like, yeah, we're deeper, so we're going to be winning more money. Same for in position. This doesn't really work out. Not both players cannot win more money. And I see that also with regulars, they tend to play more hands out of position or when they're deeper from earlier positions because they think they're going to be making more money. But what you need to understand is that actually the deeper you are, the harder it is to play out of position. The lower your equity realization. If you don't really know what I'm talking about, I also made a video about defending from the big blind where I will touch on some basic concepts around equity realization, which is very, very important. I'm not going to get too deep into that here. Just watch that video and you will get a better idea about equity realization. So let's look for 100 big blinds from under the gun. You see, we're supposed to be raising 13%. It's quite tight. It's quite tight. This is like a very, very solid, very tight range, which is not too bad. This is for 9-handed. For 8-handed tables, then of course we're going to be opening king, queen, ace, jack off. But I also explain that in my videos. I think a tight approach from under the gun is not too bad because simply we're not going to make too much money from under the gun anyway. That's not the position where you want to be printing a lot of money. So there it's better to a better approach to trying to stay away from making big mistakes. I think everything between 12% and 15% open raising from under the gun is totally reasonable. So I, for example, surely open raise around 15%. On some tables, I probably raise between 13 and 14%. I'm not opening any suited ace. I'm not opening any lower pocket pair. Yeah, king, queen, ace, jack off, I can definitely see myself opening pretty much every single time, so adding some king, jack, and ace 10 offs. I think ace 10 off is also a totally fine open raise. And if someone is opening it, that's clearly not a leak. And now let's look into 30 big blinds. And again, these ranges are based on GTO, not copied one-to-one. I think GTO wants to open fairly loose. So here we see now with 30 big blinds, we actually start opening more hands. Why? Simply because the average hand strength it requires to go broke is significantly lower with a shorter stack size. So if we have king jack off and the board is king high, if we have 20 big blinds, 30 big blinds, we're very often not going to go anywhere, and it's also then strong enough to go broke. Of course, it depends on the board runout. I'm massively oversimplifying here, but just to give you an idea. Whereas when the board is king high, let's say king 8-5, and you're 100 big blinds deep, you don't really want to play 3 streets, right? So when there's a flush draw present, you cannot just check shove the turn or go check raise flop jam turn. It's not really possible. So you have to let your opponent realize his equity. Whereas when you are 30 big blinds or 25 or 20 big blinds short, it's super easy to go broke on a king high board. If there's a flush draw present, or if the board is king 7-8 and there's some straight draw present to protect your hand. So keep that in mind. That's very essential. And as far as I remember, in the GTO Wonderland, we're actually opening with a stack size around 30 big blinds, around 18%. But I think this is also requires a decent ability of playing post-flop out of position, and it's super easy to fuck it up out of position. So here I always advise players, and something I've been doing over years, and I've been doing very well. I think very often we need to understand that we want to sometimes become a little tighter, and this is also a great exploit. It's not all about being more aggressive, being looser. So if you don't feel comfortable playing out of position, simply open raise less. So here, if we just compare the GTO approach, which would be with 100 big blinds, I think around 14% from under the gun, versus 30 big blinds, which is 18 to 19%, right? So even in GTO, the solver understands, listen, you're going to be playing out of position with 100 big blinds, so you want to be tighter. Your opponent's in position, they can float you wider, they can call c-bets wider, and you simply don't have that many hands you can go broke with. You cannot just go check raise, check shove, or check call, flop, check shove turn. Your options are way more limited. So keep that in mind. Of course, if the table is very soft, if there are a lot of recreations, you can even start limping. What I've been doing a lot of the time, if I see 2, 3, 4 recreations on the table, I started limping even more of these lower pairs, maybe some suited connectors, because I know they're going to fuck it up post flop, and this is where I can loosen up my range. So this is going to be my tip number 2, is c-betting out of position. I see big blunders here. Let's assume heads up pots. We're not going to touch base on multi-way pots. And I want to give you a little rule of thumb here that will help you to estimate your c-betting frequency. So we're going to take this spot, also ace high board. I want you to pause the video for a second and imagine the board would be ace 6-3. All right, you don't need to pause because I just spoiled it. Not spoiled, I spoilered it. So our out of position raising range, cutoff button, flatting range, something like this, some mixing between 3-betting and calling. And as we can see, we're barely c-betting anything, even though it's an ace high board. People wonder, well, we have the ace kings, we have the ace queens, we have some sets. Aren't we supposed to be way more aggressive out of position? The way you need to approach that is think about the middling part of your range. Think about your king queens, king jack, jack 10 type of hands. How do they interact with that board? And what's the playability on turns? And yeah, we have ace kings and ace queens, but everything else is really garbage. Even an ace 7 just wants to check in pot control, where our opponent can have ace jack, ace 10, ace 9, ace 6, ace 3, 6, and 3. We don't have 3 streets of value, and we don't need to protect our hand. So a lot of our aces wants to start checking, and then we have all the under pairs, plus we have missed this board quite often. Whereas the imposition player, you see that actually his air part is significantly lower because he's 3-betting some of them. So we are going to have way more air that we are carrying around. And I want to compare this spot with ace 10-9. That really helps you to illustrate, and pretty sure it's going to boost your game out of position. Let's see the ace 10-9 spot now. We compare ace 6-3 with ace 10-9. Now think about how much would you c-bet on ace 10-9. And as we can see now, we actually start c-betting way more. And a very cool feature that I always liked, I'm just someone I really learn a lot by using pictures. I'm not really an audible learner, I would say. I learn a lot if I see pictures, if I see colors. So that on ace 10-9 on the right side, you see that this is now marked as light green, which essentially means that our middling part, our king 10s, queen jacks, king jacks, have way more playability. Even something like king 7 is much better on ace 10-9, where on any 8, on any 6, any jack, any queen, we turn double gutters, open enders. But on ace 6-3, you are going to have way less cards that help us improving our middling part. And this also results in us having a higher equity. On ace 10-9, we have 54. On ace 6-3, we have only 50%. So you don't really need to dive so much into solvers, and you don't really need to dive so much into super deep strategies. It's just using your brain. Just try to compare spots And even if you have very little experience, if you just try to visualize how does your non-paired range look like on that spot, it will usually lean or hint you towards a certain strategy. And it's not about remembering frequencies. I don't know. I would have guessed ace to nine. We're probably going to be c-betting around 50%, 60%. Yeah, at the end we c-bet 70%. I don't really care. But I know that an ace to nine, we're surely going to c-betting way more than an ace 6-3, right? And now we can also use that for, let's say, ace deuce 4, ace 4-5, ace 6-7, all these one high card, two low cards. We have to be a little bit more careful. When it's then, let's say, a jack high board, additionally, we're going to have all the over pairs. That helps a little bit more. Also, like on a jack 5-4, we have the queen 10s, 10-9s, king queens that interact with the jack more. And our air part is going to have at least one overcard, right? But on ace 6-3, if we have king 5, our opponent has an ace, we're dead. It's really hard to make a better hand. But on these 10 high jack high boards, again, we at least have the over pairs and at least overcards that will help us to sometimes suck him out. And then you can also mirror it onto other boards. Of course, this tip doesn't help you to solve every single spot, but it will help you to master a lot of very easy spots that you probably have been approaching very wrong for a long time. I see people having c-betting stats 60-70% across a lot of different board textures where you're just supposed to do a lot of checking, and then you end up not really knowing what to do. You have your queen jack, you think, oh, it's a standard c-bet because we represent more ace-x. That's not really how it works. It's not really about what you can represent. It's about how does your range and how does your opponent's range interact with that board. And then ask yourself, what about, for example, with like a 4-5-6 type of board, 6-7-5. Yeah, right. It's a pretty bad board. We don't really interact with it at all. We should be checking a lot of the time and try to see a safe turn, try to see a safe river, and then pile in as much money. Or when he checks back, we can go for overbet on the turn as a delayed bet with our value hands. So, but most of the players that screw it on turn and rivers is mostly because of a flawed flop strategy. So this rule of thumb, asking yourself, how does my middling part that is not paired interact with that board? If you have a lot of playability, if you have a lot of draws or a lot of backdoor potential, right? Remember King 7 on Ace 10-9, it's not too bad, right? And King 7 is, if you open from another gun, one of the worst hands you can have. And if even that has a decent playability on a lot of different turns, this should show you, hey, right, it's time to do a lot of betting on this board. And tip number 3, play very aggressively out of position when being short. Talking around 25 big blinds. I want to use an example here for that spot as well, of course. Let's look into 10-6-4. And we're going to compare once again 100 big blinds versus 15 big blinds. What I see a lot of players doing is playing way too passively with 15 big blinds. So if we face a c-bet, which is usually going to be more on the smaller side, let's assume like 1/3, we see a bunch of raising. And as the out of position player, then if we also consider all in sizings, we can see that we're supposed to be quite aggressive here with raising and shoving around 20% of the time, which I think is fairly reasonable. And if we look into the c-betting strategy, you see that actually the in position player is supposed to be checking 40% of the time. Now think for yourself, do you think this is realistic where people are just going to be checking back that often? I do believe it's probably going to be more like 20 to 30%. I think people understand that the ace kings and ace queens, and I also think it's not so frequently mixed and cluttered. It's more like, I think people are going to be checking back ace king, ace queen, ace jack, also some like king queen, king jacks, but then they're probably going to be c-betting all the air. Like if they have the queen jack, if they have a gut shot, if they have like something like jack 9. And we see actually that we're supposed to be giving up and going for delayed bluff or just giving it up straight away quite often, right? So also the checking back range is quite strong. We see that a lot of these middling pairs are supposed to be checked second pairs, third pairs, as well as sets, 10s, 6s, and 4s. Here we see a very high frequency checking strategy, which I just don't think is happening. So now if we assume that in reality people are going to be c-betting more, they're going to be c-betting more, more of their like ace highs and king highs as well. I think, yes, I agree. I think that the sets are probably going to be betting more often, but also don't forget that just the likelihood of him having sixes is so unlikely than, let's say, having king queen or king jack or jack nine, right? So this makes it very attractive here. Also aces, yeah, of course, probably going to be betting more often. But once again, those combos do not even come close to, all the overcards and king highs and queen highs. And then I think that in reality, the best response to that strategy, a new equilibrium that emerges from our opponent's flawed in position strategy, is probably going to be raising a lot. I actually don't think it's bad to be c-betting that much, where people are not going to be so creative, raising like queen 7, king 7 here with one heart, or just calling most of their middling pairs. You see that 6-5, totally fine to raise. To be honest, here with 15 big blinds, if I have 6-5, I just check jam. I think it's a superior play against population. And we can also start adding hands like jack 8, queen 8 with like queen in hearts or 8 in hearts in our check raise bluff range, and just play it overall way more aggressively. And you will see that on a lot of different boards like 9-8, 9 high, 8 high. Now you might wonder, okay, how can I study those spots? In general, when it's a board that is not necessarily jack high, queen high, king high, ace high, which always favors the in position player, 10 high is still good for the in position player. I mean, you see that he has a lot of 10 highs at top pairs with a 10, then over pairs, and then a lot of overcards. So it's still a decent board for the in position player actually, but still checking back so often. Now, if I would take, let's say, an 8-6-4 board, it would probably be even more checking. Because if we also go into the range explorer and we just compare here for the in position player, you see he has top pair 48 combos, over pair 24 combos, second, third pair. So he has around about 80-90 combos of over pairs, second pair, third pair. Yeah, I mean sets, of course, 9. So around 90 combos, right? Either an over pairs, second pair, top pair, third pair set. If we look into the out of position player, we see that he has 75 top pairs already, 90 second pairs, and 72 third pairs. Yes, he has more air, of course, but this just gives him a big part of his range that can just essentially check shove on you. That's why you are supposed to be c-betting so little to begin with, right? And so yeah, 40% is nothing, and everything else is playable. Against a small sizing, that's not so easy. It's not so hard to defend. It's actually quite easy. So there, as an in-position player, you need to adjust. And a good player, you cannot just go ahead and c-bet everything, which on low and mid stakes, I would say is a big problem and super easy to exploit. And a good way to practice it is, be careful, advertisement here is also with paired, but I feel like it's a good fit here, where you can fire a lot of these spots, whether it's in position, out of position, and practice your own understanding, and you get explanation. But I have been also uploading stuff on YouTube, other videos, so if you want to know more about paired, which is our training tools, which focuses on, of course, you also get preflop ranges, but really hammering in those post-flop spots and practice your own understanding, seeing the results, getting an explanation delivered as well. So I think it's a great way where we do the job for you to input a lot of these spots and then you can practice. All right, so those 3 tips pre-flop. Remember, open raising less when you're deeper. Second tip, c-bet less on boards where your middling part, your unpaired hands really struggle, continuing on a lot of turns. And last but not least, play more aggressively as a short stack. Let me know in the comments what else you would like to see, which spots do you struggle with, or which situations you have no clue how to tackle them. And if you did enjoy it, smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe to not miss out on any more content. And then see you guys in the next video.